Cool. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that this will be an informative and relevant look today at how you can essentially do more with less when it comes to your AWS resources. My name is Jessica Christensen. I'm part of the Portworx team here at Pure Storage, and I'm joined today by Chris Kennedy and Andy Gower. I'll let you gentlemen say a little bit about yourselves before we jump into our material.
Yeah, so I'm Chris Kennedy. I've been with Pure Storage for 5 years, Portworx for 2.5, and I'm a cloud native architect working with some of our largest customers in both AWS and on-prem. So a lot of opportunity to see what's out there.
Awesome.
Hey, Andy Gower. I've been with Portworx for almost 2 years now, and I lead our partner and solutions marketing team here at Portworx. So we get to work with great partners like AWS and talk about the story we have together and how we're helping customers jointly improve value in the Kubernetes space.
Super cool. Thank you both. Let's hop in. All right. So everybody here is aware of the volatility in the economy today, and no one is surprised by the cost-saving measures that are all over our headlines, right? At the end of 2022, AWS began to see slower than expected growth, measuring less than 20% this past January. According to AWS's CFO, Brian Olsavsky, you can see the quote here. They see that everyone is trying to cut their budget. Andy, can you walk us through how we got here and just the history of consumption of storage and where we are today?
Yeah, and I think the story starts kind of all the way back at the beginning of cloud. I like to think of cloud and the evolution of cloud in kind of 3 distinct phases. You go back to the very beginning of cloud, and there's this rush into cloud, by the executives to say, hey, this thing sounds great. I got to go tell my board that we're moving to cloud. CEO gets on the earnings call and says, hey, my whole IT shop is moving to the cloud. And what that meant was CIOs and IT teams started lifting and shifting existing applications, heavy applications built on VMs onto cloud. And what they quickly found out was 2 things. Doing that wasn't any cheaper than running the data center. And number 2, a lot of those applications just didn't function as well on cloud. If they just did a lift and shift, they really weren't providing the value that everyone thought they were going to get with cloud. And so we started to see a repatriation from cloud back to the data center until the second inflection point came along, and that was containers and Kubernetes. Containers and Kubernetes introduced this lightweight way for us to build applications, run them in a cloud-native way, and start to really harness the value of cloud without the heaviness of the virtual machine. And so we saw a big acceleration of folks either being built in the cloud from the start or starting to completely refactor their current applications into containers and Kubernetes, into microservices, and bringing those into the cloud with a lot of success. Some of the biggest companies in the world started embracing Kubernetes and containers on cloud as a way to roll out new features and functions to their customers, to bring new AI into the factory, to really accelerate the different things they were doing with their business. And then there's kind of phase 3, which is where we are today. And this phase really was driven by COVID, as it turns out. So when COVID hit, there was this instant, immediate change in people's business processes. We went from this world and this economy where people went into stores and they shopped. They went to a physical storefront to interact for their goods and services, to this world where everyone was stuck at home and the only way to transact was digitally. And so businesses overnight had to go from a physical footprint to a digital footprint. And in doing that, they spun up applications, web front ends, web back ends, new applications internally so that their distributed teams could work together, even though they were sitting at home in different parts of the world. And they did all this with a focus on how do I keep revenue in the door, not how do I efficiently build the next set of applications. And so fast forward to today, and that bill's finally coming due. We've got this set of applications that was built for a world that was all distributed and digital, but isn't quite there anymore. We've seen traffic for some folks recede. We've seen people start to go back into the office. And so now we've got to figure out how do we make those applications and those decisions we made during COVID more efficient, more cost effective, so we can continue to have the value that we brought to the table, but in a more efficient way. And so that really puts us into Brian's quote here, where we've got to cut our budgets. We've got to contain our cloud costs that started to run away here in the last 18 months.
Right, right. So what I hear you saying is basically there is this rapid proliferation of applications. We needed to be relevant to the customers and what they were expecting. We weren't necessarily thinking about efficiency. Just wasn't a priority up until like now. So in this chart, we can see that storage and software consumption have been prolific over the last several years. So Chris, I'll ask you a question. Now that the economic landscape is changing a little bit, how does Portworx really help customers to balance their costs while keeping their relevant applications highly performant?
That's a great question, Jessica. And I think that really the chart illustrates a lot of it. So, Andy mentioned that kind of in that second phase of cloud, we started moving to microservices and to containers. And so what ended up happening was, there was the premise that containers should always be stateless. And so you saw this big surge in, database software being run by cloud providers. And that would be the purple line you see growing so high. Their various, function services, the software that the actual cloud providers are providing. And then on top of that, we were using their native constructs for storage. So EBS volumes, EFS, S3, and anyone that's a practitioner in cloud understands that EBS, you're paying for performance. So you need a bigger volume if you need more performance. So in a lot of cases, you had over provisioning. Where Portworx comes in is we come in and we lay a consistent data layer on top of the cloud and make it such that your developers and your software teams have an operating model that is the same no matter whether you're on this cloud, this region, that region. And then additionally, we can bring in Portworx data services and be able to offer that software element of the database as a service side, which then brings in some operational efficiencies, some cost savings on the software side. But when you combine those two, the Portworx data layer being able to take the underlying AWS storage infrastructure, what we do is we're able to make that a pool of storage that applications can then provision just what they need. And we have means to grow those volumes or those pools, just in time, so that we're not having to over provision. And when we look at databases, instead of spinning up tens or 20 or hundreds of instances of software from the cloud provider, with PDS, you're able to come in and in just a minute or two have a running instance of Postgres or Kafka or Redis or whatever you need to make up your software solution. And so you start to begin to get not only efficiencies with thin provisioning in the storage, but also operational efficiencies in deployment and a consistent operating model across your cloud estate.
And I just want to jump on that point you made there, Chris, about the thin provisioning in particular and the performance. I think a lot of what we saw as we kind of think about that phase 3, where people were rushing to build new applications for a new digital world, there was this mindset of, I've got to make sure I have the performance there at all times. I've got to make sure I can handle the traffic. I have no idea what kind of traffic we're going to see. I don't want to be the one getting blamed for my application going down when it's the only source of revenue for the company, with every storefront closed across the globe. And so there was this rush to over provision the underlying storage. There's this rush to just make sure there was more than enough of everything. And what you're talking about is the ability to go back and say, okay, let's actually intelligently provision that storage. Let's actually look at making sure that we're not provisioning that next node, that next terabyte, that next whatever it is we're provisioning until we actually need it. Let's put some rules in place that say, hey, until the current volume is 85% full, we don't need to touch anything. And when it does get there, if we have a huge surge in traffic, we can just automatically add additional capacity as needed, and then draw that back down. And I think that's something you certainly have seen in the field, customers using, in production to help manage, things like bursting for seasonality or for, surges in traffic around a launch that then let them, support that launch, but pull back down without having to keep that over provisioning in place long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we also see it on the software side as well with the various data services that are in use from the cloud providers. They during that phase 3 that COVID, during the COVID time, applications were being built, databases were being deployed using the cloud services, their software. And now, you have companies dealing with these massive databases in services that they don't manage, and they're trying to figure out how to handle that and how to move forward. And when you can bring a unified platform that is really easy to work with, then you offer an alternative solution and a better option to evaluate where you're investing your dollars.
So speaking of investments, Andy, maybe if you can click over to the next slide. We're all keeping tabs on what the analysts are saying. We're thinking about forecasts. It's that time of year. You'll see on the slide just a note from a recent IDC report. And so while we are all under the same impression that leaders are highly concerned about how much budget they are going to need in order just to stay competitive, right? In the last few years, we've landed at this point. We kind of have to keep up a certain level of performance and availability. Customers have new expectations in 2023 than they ever have. So they're not cutting costs in all places. They're really looking to optimize what they have. We've already touched on that, but they're also looking to invest heavily in ways that will maximize automation throughout business workflows, which will mean that they're seeing higher ROI for their employees and their very, very valuable time, right? So Andy, can you touch a little more on just development costs and how Portworx helps to automate application development and management?
Yeah, I think this is a really important piece of the puzzle as we think about managing costs, going forward. It's it's a two-way street. It's how do we actually cut the line item of cost, which is what we just talked about with physical costs, physical storage costs, but also how do I get more from my existing employees, or how do I get more from my existing infrastructure, my existing environment, without having to necessarily invest another dollar into it. And where Portworx really is a big player in the space, how we really help is we begin to automate a lot of those processes that are heavily manual today in bringing applications to market. So especially stateful applications on something like EKS. You think about something like a CI/CD pipeline, or your movement of an application from a blue-green deployment. All those things require a lot of different steps. We go into companies and often they'll talk about the steps involved in putting that app in production. It's I've got this application, I've got this process, then it has to go to this person for this process, then I have to open this ticket, then I have to open this ticket, then it has to go back to this person, then I've got to make sure that the security requirements are in place, which is another ticket. And so that actual cycle of getting an application out is time consuming, it's manual, there's not a lot of automation. What Portworx does is it comes in and it automates a lot of those storage and data management tasks, things like provisioning the underlying storage, monitoring that storage, scaling that storage, implementing security protocols, implementing role-based access control, adding things like disaster recovery, both synchronous and asynchronous, adding things like automated backups or on-demand backups with a single click. And by automating all these different processes, instead of our development teams and our ops teams spending time doing the process and having to actually get their fingers into all those little nitty-gritty things, we can free them up to actually work on what they're hired for, which is developing and writing new code, putting new features out in market, putting new applications out, keeping us as the market leader in whatever space we're in. And at the same time, we can give our ops team more line of sight into what the developers are doing without additional burden. So we can give them that kind of single pane of glass view to see all the different databases that a developer is spinning up, all the different pieces of storage that are being consumed in that application, all the different users that are accessing different applications. So the operator has that level of control and confidence to roll out a self-service model to the developers. So you really get the best of both worlds, both the ability for developers to do their jobs and ops to do their jobs. And what we find with a lot of companies is we can reduce that time spent on manual processes by anywhere from 60 to 80%. And those are some real hard savings. You think about a typical work week of 40 hours. If you can eliminate 10 to 15, even 20 hours of someone's time that's spent on manual processes, even more in a more and more complex environment, suddenly you have a lot of time to go pursue new projects, to go roll out new releases, to go work on new things for the company instead of just working on manual processes. And I think, Chris, again, this is something that you and your field work, we see this at a ton of companies. This is not a one-off situation. This is something I think you've come across in many instances.
We have a customer of my own that is, they're a global leader in the IoT space. And of all things, they actually consider themselves a software shop, but they've embraced Portworx and Portworx data services and cloud technologies and are now deploying this IoT infrastructure globally with a team of 40 people. And that's handling not only the deployment, but day 2 operations, upgrades, backups, disaster recovery. And we're talking IoT. I mean, we're talking stuff that cannot go down. I mean, I can't name their name. And if I start talking about, the types of IoT objects, it would be pretty easy to figure out. But, regardless, this is all being done today and is a real world example of what we're talking about. So we're not just telling you a pie in the sky story.
Well,
and it's not.
Sorry, Andy, I'm going to throw a curveball in there and just touch on a survey that we actually ran as a marketing team here at Portworx, right? We asked the question, like, what does it mean for you on a personal level when you can do more with your time at work? And people are actually happier. They're happier, they're more satisfied at work, they're going to stay there for longer, reducing the turnover. So the return on this is like almost endless when you think about employee productivity. But Andy, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No. That's a great point. And where I was going to go too is it's not just the productivity of people you have today. It's also the productivity of people as you bring them on, or as you acquire new companies or bring new shops into the fold. We work with a global manufacturer who has standardized on Kubernetes across the board. And by using Portworx in conjunction with Kubernetes, as new shops come into their life, into their business, they're able to more quickly get them rolled into the IT infrastructure. They're able to use Portworx and Kubernetes as that broad control plane. So instead of spending 12, 18, 24 months bringing a new IT shop on board, they can lay down the rails of Kubernetes plus Portworx to bring that new shop into the fold and start taking advantage of that acquisition or that new team quickly and easily. And this one was particularly interesting. We visited them, walked into one of their factories, and they said, everything you see going on here, that's automated in the back end with Portworx. You've got this incredible manufacturing facility, and everything in the back end is being essentially managed by Portworx and automated so that people can do their jobs and not spend time making sure that the technology is up and running. So I think those are a couple good examples of how you can actually bring people real cost through making them more productive through that automation. It's really all about that automation that Portworx brings to the table.
And I know that we can't necessarily name the company that you're talking about, Andy, but I want to say, just for the folks on the phone, right? The company that we're referring to here really has automation at its core foundation from the very beginning. It's a really, really well-known organization that you probably use every day, and if you don't, then your neighbor probably does. So we're talking about very big shops doing a lot of very big things with more and with the resources they already have. I'm just really excited about that. I keep chiming in. Sorry for cutting you guys off.
That was a really fun tour. So
yeah. What do you think? Should we talk a little bit more about like mitigating risk? And so let's do it. So
I think this is really important, Jessica.
Yeah, it is. Oh, just my question was going to be, we've talked a lot about doing more with what we have now, but what about avoiding loss, right? The cost of downtime is immeasurable, and it's a very big impact to productivity, to customer trust, to brand equity. The losses are multiple fold. So how does Portworx and AWS minimize the odds of these hefty sorts of losses impacting our customers?
Yeah, so I think this is a great opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more about Portworx itself, because I run into this conversation in the field very often. I'll be talking to a platform or a developer, platform team or a developer team, and talking about the architecture that they're laying out. And you can tell that the design decisions are really built around the cloud capabilities. And so things come into play like single availability zone failure. And we actually had 3 years of, once a month, some cloud or some application went down, and it was major headline news for a long time. Most recently, Spirit, we had an airline that had to cancel thousands of flights due to an outage. And so what Portworx does is we actually give you the resiliency to be able to spread your applications across a single availability zone within a region. So if an AZ goes down, it'll come up in another availability zone. Or if you are geo-dispersed, you can replicate from one region of AWS to another and be able to spin that application back up in another region. If there's an outage in, say, US East 1, then you can bring it up in US West 2 or Frankfurt or wherever is available that you're replicating to. But ultimately, it's about putting those mitigating points in and then putting data protection in place and using, immutable backups of your applications, leveraging both technologies brought to you by Portworx as well as AWS, and the combination of those two really give you that resiliency and that protection as you're moving forward, really.
Well, I think the other thing too that Portworx does really well here is, while we're talking about AWS specifically, Portworx is cloud agnostic. Portworx supports any cloud infrastructure, and we support any Kubernetes platform. And so what that means is, from an application availability standpoint, you can have a primary cloud on AWS, but you may want to keep your backups elsewhere. That might be on-prem with something like EKSA. It might be with another cloud provider. It might be on-prem with another Kubernetes platform. It doesn't matter where it is. Portworx is able to cross that boundary, so you can diversify where your backups are. You can make it, put them in different places and have that peace of mind that if one goes down, the likelihood of every single one going down is close to zero. So you can be back up and running pretty quickly. The other thing I just wanted to mention on this too is, this piece on the left, the 87% of organizations reported an outage in the past calendar year. Everything we talked about on the last slide around automation feeds into lowering this number too. So you think about those manual processes where you've got, 6 different people having put in 7 different things and 4 different tickets. The place for, or the opportunity for mistakes is right, but it happens. We all make mistakes. We type something in incorrectly, we're not thinking, we hit enter, and suddenly the application is down. The automation in number 2 that we talked about on the slide before, also helps here too. It helps mitigate some of that security risk because we're automating that away from the manual and human error, and in doing so, kind of bringing down those number of mistakes, bringing down those number of outage points.
Another great point to that, Andy, that I'm seeing a lot in the field is companies that are using Portworx to save in their cloud costs during the development process. So they'll develop on site, but then when they're ready to bring an application to scale, they'll use Portworx to move it from their on-prem infrastructure into their cloud infrastructure and then launch the product on the cloud. And so it's that agility, that ability to, develop on-prem with assets you've already sweated, and then move into production to the cloud where you're able to scale to the size you need, is a tremendous value that we're seeing in the field.
Yeah, and on top of that, it's the somewhat unique to Portworx, not just encryption at rest, but also encryption in flight. So as you move those applications, they're getting back to this question around outages, security, ransomware. You limit the vulnerability during that migration with that encryption piece, right? So these all tangentially, tie to cost. It's not directly, hey, I'm going to see my bill go down because I prevented an outage. It's hard to quantify that directly, but when you look at the full year and you look at how much did I spend this year in recovering from the outage, how much revenue did I lose because my app was down for 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 4 hours, 8 hours. If we can start to get that number down, we can see an impact in less revenue loss, or we can see an impact in less cost going out the door to recover from these outages. So It's a not quite a top line cost item, but it's a critical item as we think about how do we rein our budgets in throughout the course of the year.
Hey guys, we could talk about this all day. I think it's pretty clear to see that Portworx is a critical technology. The market is at a really big inflection point right now. We're changing again to be a world where the fast eat the slow, and you're going to win by innovating quickly and being responsive to the needs of the market and to the needs of your own budget and your own infrastructure. So that said, I'm gonna bring us home and just let everybody who has joined us today know that I will be the person sending you a lunch gift card to those with qualifying email addresses. If you have any questions, you can ping me. They will be coming throughout the day, maybe into tomorrow morning. Thank you so much for your time. But more importantly, you can use this QR code. We'll have different ways that you can get in touch with us. Portworx is not really a one size fits all solution, right? And the sort of consultative conversation that our CNA team can have, our cloud experts can have around taking a look at your resources, your needs, your priorities, your timelines for Kubernetes implementation or optimization. Let's talk about it. Like, let's help you get it right with Kubernetes, and Portworx is here to walk with you along the way. So feel free to respond to one of the emails that I'll send you. Get in touch. Let's find a time to talk. It's a big moment, and we want to make sure that you're all getting it right and staying ahead of the curve. Now, any parting thoughts, Chris and Andy?
No,
Go ahead.
I appreciate you guys. Yeah, I was gonna say, I appreciate you guys listening. Feel free to reach out as well to Chris and myself. It's our first initial and last name at purestorage.com. Apologies, we should have posted that on this page as well, but happy to engage. We've got a number of great events coming up too. We'll be at KubeCon in Europe. We've got the AWS Summit series coming up later in the year. So if you're at those, please come by the booth and engage with us. If not before then, and we're happy to continue having this conversation with you.
Yeah. All right, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, be healthy and well. Take good care. Thanks so much for the time. I cannot.